to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 485. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the bed next to me, which reminds me, I better take a picture of you, Luis. This is what they pay the big bucks for over on the Patreon. Oh, pretty shot. Look at you. It's Luis Scott-Vargas.
Howdy.
Luis, are we still alive? It is Sunday night of PAX East. We have had quite a run. We both came in on Wednesday?
I came in on Tuesday.
I think I did too.
Well,
I did come in on Tuesday, yeah.
You've been working for 4 days. I played 20 minutes of Magic and then I was done with my responsibilities for the weekend.
All right, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Luis is here, of course, playing in the Mythic Invitational tournament, and I was covering it. And we actually meant to do the show a couple of days ago, but PAX has a way of kind of becoming a bit of a whirlwind, especially with time obligations already set out and stuff. So we're recording this on a Sunday night from the hotel here. But
it's the latest show's ever gone up, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, PAX will do that to you. First things first, though, got to thank our sponsor, channelfireball.com. That's the place to go for all things Magic related on the internet. Of course, you're going to find awesome free content right on the front page of CFB. One thing that came up in a conversation I had with a friend a little while ago that I don't know if everybody is aware of, but some of the articles on CFB are also available in audio form.
Yeah, we have got Chris Yansdell kind of, I guess, not making, but reciting our audio articles. He's the one who provides narration for those.
Right. So that's cool. It's like a mini podcast.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I think that, we've been pretty happy about how those have been going, and I'd encourage you to check those out if that's what you're interested in.
Yeah.
If you want kind of like a shorter podcast-esque form of content.
That's right. If you're on the go and you like to listen to podcasts, which we know you do because you're here, then that's another way that you can absorb more Magic knowledge into your ears from Channel Fireball. While you're there, make sure you pick up everything you need for your Magic collection, whether it's a sealed product or maybe some singles for a new deck that you're working on. You can find it at CFB. They're going to get it shipped out to you nice and quick. And they always stand by their product. That's why we love channelfireball.com. Also, you can support the show via the Patreon. Talking to Luis a little bit right before the show. We've got a couple of cool things that they've added onto that we're looking to take advantage of. I'll talk about those when they're ready to go. But lots of perks for joining up and being a patron supporting the show. If you think that this show has helped you out, or if it's just if you like what you hear here, you can support us. You can go to patreon.com. Help keeps us motivated and keeping the show coming out every single week. So we've got a crack-a-pack here, and this is the last of that special box that I got. I can't remember. Oh, yeah, you get to do it.
Yeah, I want to open this. The Planeswalker packs, the masterpieces or what have you.
The way I understood it was that there was 8 of them, and you got all 8 of them, so I think this should have Dak Faden in it by...
The Greatest Thief in the Multiverse?
Yeah, that's the one. So we'll find out, though. I assume that I knew how this worked.
All right, so we're going to kick things off with Homunculus.
We're going to kick Homunculus to the curb.
Yeah, 2/5 hexproof. You play this in some of like high alert decks. That's about it. Stormstrike is next.
Homunculus down.
+1/+0, first strike, scry 1. I like this as a curve filler. Like if I'm playing a Rakdos or Gruul deck and need a low curve and need another trick, but not a card you're going to first pick. Civic Stalwart is next. Another card.
Whatever happened to that card, by the way?
Civic Stalwart?
I never see it on the battlefield, ever. It's a common, right?
I really only play it in aggro Orzhov decks, which doesn't happen all that often. I still think controlling Orzhov is a little bit better, but Civic Stalwart's fine in an aggressive Orzhov deck. But again, this is the 4-mana 3/3, gives your whole team ++1 turn. Not a card you want to first pick at all. Stony Strength is next. This is the trick that gives one of your creatures a ++1 counter and untaps it. Most often found in the company of Shark to Crab. But not a card you're...
Get you an extra activation.
Right, an extra tap, all that interested in otherwise. Undercity's Embrace. This is the 2 and a black instant. Makes your opponent sack a creature. If you have a 4 power creature, you gain 4. A really funny card. So normally I don't think that there is much of a difference between pod drafting and league drafting. Or, drafting kind of like on Arena or Magic Online where you don't play against people from your pod. Undercity's Embrace is one of the bigger cards that changes in valuation. And I ran into this actually at the Pro Tour where I should have main decked 2 of them and only played 1.
So explain that. What do you mean it changes?
And the reason is you have pretty much equal chances of facing Orzhov as any other guild. Maybe slightly more, actually, on Arena and Magic Online, especially Arena because Orzhov's the best guild. When you draft in a pod, like I did, I was confident that I was the only Orzhov player, and I was correct. This card's much weaker against Orzhov. it's much better against like Gruul and
Simic and Gruul, it's great.
So you can end up in a spot where you are going to play against fewer Orzhov decks and more Simic and Gruul decks, at which point Undercity's Embrace is a lot more enticing.
It moves into playable. I said it was great. That's a little much. It's not great. But
Sauroform Hybrid. This card is great.
Yeah, there you go.
2 mana, 2/2. You pay 6 to adapt 4.
The Sauropod Hybrid.
The Sauropod. And I like Sauroform Hybrid over Aeromunculus, which is our next card here, just because of the color commitment. This card goes in any deck. Plus, it's a 2-drop. Really hard to find those.
Arguably just a better card.
Yeah. Goblin Gathering, kind of a meme card. I have not been impressed by it.
Never got there on that.
Sending Griffin's a card I've been less impressed with than I initially thought.
Thought it would be super rock solid playable for the duration of the format, and I've gone down and down.
It's a little bit less than that. Like, look, you'll play it, but I just don't pick it all that highly, and so I would not take Sending Griffin here. In fact, I would take Sending Griffin below both Aeromunculus and Sauroform Hybrid. Bolrak Clan Crusher. This is the 3 red-green for a 4/4. At uncommon, you can tap to remove a +1 counter, deal 2 damage to any target. A fine card.
It's fine.
I've always played in Gruul.
Yeah.
I've splashed it in Simic before.
It pays the 5-drop tax for sure. Where even with a decent ability with decent stats, it's
so right. I would not start with it over Sauroform or Aeromunculus, but I would take it over Sending Griffin.
Nice combo, by the way.
Yeah.
Put the counters on the Sauroform Hybrid, start tossing them around.
Oh yeah, that's an effective one. Light Up the Stage is next. Constructed All-Star.
Wax a chump like a candle.
Yeah, yes. I think that I would just still Sauroform over Light Up the Stage. Light Up the Stage is a fine card.
It's just okay.
Yeah. Ooh, here we've got something. We've got Orzhov Enforcer. This is the 2 mana 1/2 Death Touch Afterlife 1. I think I would just take Orzhov.
I like that one the best.
Card's really good. It's very good in Rakdos.
It's so annoying if you're playing green. You're sitting here with the Sauroform Hybrids and stuff, and your opponent's like, yeah, cool.
Simic Ascendancy is our rare.
I like the Enforcer better.
I think it's worse. Simic Ascendancy is worse than Enforcer or Sauroform Hybrid or Aeromunculus, in my opinion.
I agree. I thought it was going to be better. Yeah.
And then Gruul Guildgate, and then Dak Fade. Now I won't.
Hey, what about the emblem?
Oh yeah, there's a Dak emblem. I'll restrain myself from throwing the Dak Fade, and I've thrown all the rest of the cards onto the floor.
Yeah, I'm going to get a little shot here of your handiwork. This is what Crack-a-Pack looks like when we let Luis do it. I'll put that one on the Patreon instead of the other one. All right, but Dak looks sweet, and we do have a person to ship that to. This is going to be Jean-Luc Brouillet. So thank you so much. Jean-Luc comes from, well, maybe not comes from, but lives in California. And I just wanted to say thank you to Jean-Luc for supporting us on the Patreon. And I hope you enjoy your Dak Faden special, shiny, whatever. That was fun that we did that. Luis, I want to have kind of a chill show this week. Look, we're kind of winding down the format. Right, we've been playing plenty of Ravnica Allegiance, and it's kind of in the time where we're waiting for the next set to come out. We'll often do level up shows or have guests on during these times. But I figured since you and I are together in the room here, and we just got done with quite a week here at PAX, that we could just have kind of a hangout session with you and I. First things first, what happened to the Mythic Invitational?
Well, so the format of this
Second thing, give me that damn phone.
Oh, here, I'll move it over here. I was just looking at show notes.
Yeah, I'm sure you are.
The Mythic Invitational format was...
There are no show notes, by the way. All I did was put in the winner. It's just blank.
That's my go-to excuse. I was looking up how to find keyboards that don't make noise for use during a normal show.
How do I turn off the sounds on my computer?
So the Mythic Invitational was duo standard, which means we bring 2 best of 1 decks, and it was double elimination, which means we had 16 player pods, and then when you got your second loss, you were out. So I played 5 games of Magic. I lost 0-2 to Cedric round 1, and then I lost 1-2 to Merchant round 2.
Didn't seem like there was a lot of play.
No. Best of one standard is very fast. It rewards proactive decks. So the 3 most popular decks by a mile were White Weenie, Mono Red, and Esper. Yeah. I think in the order of White Weenie, then Esper, then Mono Red. But
I think it was Esper, then White Weenie.
Okay, Esper, White Weenie, Mono Red. But yes, it was those. I believe almost everyone in the tournament had one of those 3 decks, and most people had 2 of those 3 decks.
Yep.
So I played Esper and Mono Red. The games were really fast. I just kind of got run over. I actually lost just to White Weenie 4 times, and I thought the red deck that I played had an advantage against White Weenie. I did like that matchup. And then I thought the Esper deck was pretty close to a coin flip. We had 6 Wraths, which is nice. But As it turned out, like I just played a couple games. It's a pretty brutal tournament structure, like in a pretty brutal format.
Brutal. Yeah, I mean, I was doing commentary for it, so I was covering all the matches and stuff, or a bunch of them, and it seemed super brutal, dude. Like people were getting knocked out left and right, and they were. I mean, the way it worked was over the course of the first 2 days, we went from 64 players down to 16.
I mean, 75% of the field gets eliminated
in day one, basically.
After, the first day of play, even though that was split over 2 days.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of complicated because it's an exhibition tournament, and I understand like why you'd make a lot of decisions with that in mind. And it was really cool to be a part of it. Like, this was a cool event. Watching it on Twitch, being there, seeing the whole production, and it was quite the production, seeing the prize money, seeing all that stuff. It was $7,500 for last place. So I'm sort of not complaining about that. That said, it wasn't the kind of Magic that is super deep. It just wasn't. Best of one standard, like, the games are pretty fast. The games go, kind of like down a certain path most of the time. Like, look, our listeners don't need us to tell them why limited is better than constructed.
Yeah.
They know. But suffice to say it is, and I didn't realize how big of a deal it was losing sideboards. Interesting in terms of deck diversity, right? Like Sultide, Mono Blue, basically weren't decks that we really saw. There's one Mono Blue deck, one Sultide deck in the tournament, one Golgari deck, whatever. Mm-hmm. The Arclight Phoenix deck, for example, without a sideboard is just can't really fight back against control decks. So
completely gone.
Yeah, so you end up with a much smaller field, and I don't love that. So I can't say that I'm hoping that this exact format gets replayed, but a lot of the other things about the tournament I thought were great. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't watched it yet, you can go back and watch the VOD of the Mythic Champion. Excuse me, that almost happened, by the way. The Mythic Invitational. It's interesting because it felt like a huge step forward for Magic.
Yeah,
like just viscerally, it felt that way. I mean, it had $1 million prize pool, which is unprecedented. It was at PAX. We broadcast today from the PAX Arena, which is the main area where like the esports and stuff happen. We had a packed house. I mean, there was not a seat open, and there was people lined up along the sides to watch to see who was going to win. Something worked. We broke our record for concurrent viewers by a factor of almost 3. Before it was around 50K, and we got something like 125, 150. I didn't hear the exact number, but I mean, it was well over 100,000. The response on social media was fantastic. People loved seeing the mix of personalities, different types of players, and all that kind of stuff. I don't think the response to the format wasn't super positive.
No,
I felt like people didn't. It's just there's this dilemma that I keep thinking of, Luis, and maybe you have an idea about how a company should approach this type of thing. But I keep thinking of how Wizards of the Coast bread is buttered, right? Yeah. What made this product great? And it's the depth, right? One of the things you hear quoted from marketing people, they call it like stickiness. Like how long people play a game or a product for, how long they use it for. And, most entertainment products are pretty narrow. They're pretty short. They're not, you kind of play them for a little while and then you're off it. But Magic has an incredibly long stickiness for the players that actually get into it. They play it for something like 7.5 years, right? Which is absurd. Like, any other game would absolutely kill for that. But the interesting thing to me is if you put your eggs, so as a corporation that's publicly owned, the natural inclination is to grow. That's what you have to do when you're a corporation. You can't simply sit there and just make money and be like, we're good. You have to grow. And the place to grow are people that don't currently play Magic for 7.5 years. So you need to look to them. That makes good logical sense. The question is how much of the bread and butter of Magic, that super in-depth, this is a lifestyle brand, right? I don't pull this game out of the closet and play it every month or something like that. I play it every day. I talk about it every day. I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
I spend all my free money on it. It's my main hobby. How much of that do you give up to try to reach out into a wider audience? Right. And I think this is like a little microcosm of that, right?
It totally is.
Yeah. And so the question that I want to see is, where do they go next from this? Because there was a lot to be gained from this tournament, as far as knowledge, as far as pushing the game forward and outward, and esports and all that great stuff. And I think that's really important steps to take. But if we sell out, right, if we say, you know what, we're going to make this game just purely viewer friendly with no real thought process to, well, how in depth is this? How much do people really like that part of it? That's too far. I don't think they want to do that. I don't think that's what's going to happen. But how far do you go? That's the answer.
Well, that's the difficult hard to answer. And it's also just hard to, I mean, if you're talking about like individual card design and set design, it's also really hard to land that where you want it to begin with.
Yeah.
That's just difficult stuff. Like it is, game design is really hard.
Yeah.
You have to look at stuff like, oh, well, almost everyone chooses to play best of one when they play an arena. Well, does that mean that's what everyone wants to watch? Maybe, maybe not. We're still going to try to find those things out, and Wizards is going to try to find those things out.
Yeah.
And I hope there's room for everything. Like, I want Magic to have a lower barrier for entry. It's really hard to get into Magic. Look, one of the things I like about this podcast, and we're usually a little more focused than we are this week, but we're still kind of decompressing from this, is that we're, I think, a good first stop for people who want to learn how to play Limited.
Absolutely.
Who want to dip their toes into that. And we're going to try to get you through that process, and being a part of that. Yeah, Magic's really hard. You don't want to scare people off, and some people do bounce off that barrier.
Yeah.
That said, I don't want every tournament to be, okay, well, I'm picking 2 of Esper, Mono Red, White Weenie and hoping to win the die roll.
Right.
Because that's what, this tournament felt too heavy in that direction.
Yeah, and Magic isn't really well set up for that currently anyway. One of the things that we saw from a play pattern perspective was we had a lot of Esper mirrors, right? Because they kind of became inevitable with so many people playing it. And there's so many cards set up in the Esper decks to beat the small creature-based decks or the red decks. And they do nothing in the mirror.
Yeah, Kaya's Wrath, Moment of Craving, Cry the Carnarium.
Yeah.
And then you even have like Vraska's Contempt and Mortify, which have targets, but still are cards you generally would choose not to draw.
Exactly. And, I got to tell you, on camera, that's not that cool, right? Just watching somebody sit there with 4 uncastable or one of the most creative plays we saw was cast Kaya's Wrath and counter it to gain 3 life with Absorb.
Right.
Like my own Kaya's Wrath.
Or cast Cry the Carnarium to fill up my graveyard for a search for those cards.
Yeah, it's just that's not where you want to be, right? That's not showing off the cards in the way that people
I think it's doing a disservice to Magic if that's what people think it all is, but it's not all that.
No, and I will say that one of the takeaways from me is I'm really glad that Wizards has decided to push out, right? Like, look, it doesn't have to be perfect for the first attempt for me to be happy with it. I'm just glad that they're willing to take risk here, put $1 million prize pool, put all the money into the coverage and all that stuff, and put us out in front of people because it was friggin' awesome, dude. Like what I did is when I wasn't in, and it was Alias V and Paul, I went out. I just sat in the crowd. I just watched it. I just thought, okay, what is this about? Like, there's this huge screen. There's these sparkler machine things. There's all this crazy stuff. I'm like, I want to get a feel for this. And it was awesome. Like, all around me, people were discussing lines of, oh, no, he shouldn't have played a land there. He's going to, oh, no. He's got to try to get and it was just, that's what we love about the game.
And I think just having it on Arena. Too.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, my God, dude. Commentating Arena. I can't wait to get in the booth with you for something on Arena because it is so fun. You get to see every single card, super easy. It's awesome because you get the animations and the bang, bang, bang. People
that part is great.
Yeah, and also it allowed me to commentate faster. Like a more esportsy style. Rather than the other where you have to kind of build in these long pauses for shuffling and sideboarding and stuff like that.
Like the players thinking longer because it takes more time to process these things, whereas Arena kind of trains you to play pretty fast.
It does.
It just highlights all the cards you can cast. You don't have to look at the cards you don't.
Yeah. So hopefully some tweaking to this type of stuff. But boy, it was quite a pleasure to get a chance to do this.
Every time there's a drastic change, especially to something you love, it's both exciting and frightening. And this weekend had a mix of both.
Yes.
Like, I would say it's overall positive. Overall very positive.
Oh, yeah.
I'm very excited about where Magic is going. That doesn't mean that I and some other people have, a little bit of trepidation over, like, what is Magic going to look like, a particularly competitive Magic? Because, there are parts of it I think are good that I'd like to keep.
Yeah, and what do we want to reward and all the incentives and all that stuff.
Because, especially if it turns into, an enterprise where luck plays a bigger role, I'm in a lot of trouble at that point. Like, I've learned that that's not something I can rely on.
It's literally your first initial. Come on.
That's true.
All right, let's get some questions here. I put up a post for people to ask us anything about PAX. Yeah, we know. Yeah, in the show notes, right? First one. Well, okay. The first one's from Ole, who says thoughts on the Mythic Championship best of 3-ish format. Well, I guess we got that one already done. Pablo says, genius or grifter. Your opponent is about to cast a spell. You haul out a card from your hand as if you're about to counter their spell, but you're just bluffing it, and the card you're holding isn't really a counter spell. Your opponent pulls back and doesn't cast a spell. Thanks for the great show.
I think that this, I don't think it's either genius or grifter.
Yeah.
This is just a fine thing to do.
You can do this.
If you want to do that, like, I can tell you that I would not fall for that if I were someone playing, but it's the sort of thing.
It almost guarantees that they don't have it in fact, but yeah. You know, one of the first times that I saw a player do that, it was in the feature match area at the Pro Tour. They didn't do it with that. What they actually did was they had a reactive spell in their hand. And you know how when you play a land from your hand, you'll often put the bottom of the card on the cardboard and put your finger on top and then tilt it forward to play it down? They did that with not a land, no lands in hand, and then pulled it back to their hand and said go.
Yeah.
As if to say, like, I thought about playing a land, but then I wanted to bluff that I had a spell or whatever. I thought, wow, that's pretty clever.
That was genius.
Yeah, definitely genius. You get one guess at who it was.
Huey.
No. That's a good guess, though. Nicholas says, for both of you, if you got to watch the Mythic Invitational, who outside of the MPL and Luis and Asif, because of Hall of Fame, impressed you with their play? Would it be worth it to study any games from the Mythic Invitational?
I think Savitz played quite well.
He did.
They're making top four.
He had some game. I mean, there were some decisions that were pretty close in there, and I think he could have gone either way, but he showed that he had a good understanding of how things went.
No one plays perfect. That's just not how it works. But, but stuff like he was the player who did absorb his own Kaya's Wrath. And like that shows just like that you're thinking about things at a more than just a level of like play the highlighted cards. I think he definitely has a lot of experience. He's a Hearthstone pro. Like he knows how to play card games, is quite good at them. And I thought,
I think he could absolutely be a good professional Magic player if that's what he decided to do. I don't know about any games that I would focus on specifically just because the format's so weird. It's like, I mean, I guess that you could learn something. Nothing jumps out to mind. I'll say that.
I mean, the game of where Matt Nass played against Seth Manfield, you don't have to watch the game because it's really long.
It was incredible.
But what happened was Seth ultimated Teferi, had a Teferi emblem, was exiling all of Matt's lands. But this was a kind of a triumph of Matt knowing what exact cards were left in Seth's deck, and Matt ends up winning the game by casting Mastermind's Acquisition for Unmoored Ego and exiling all of Seth's Teferis and deck and Seth.
And like a couple turns before he was going to run out of lands to be able to make that play.
And so like that was the sort of thing where Matt just had to know what mattered and what got him there.
Yeah. It was interesting because a couple of turns prior to that, he used a Thought Erasure to take away a negate. And I thought to myself, good play, like he's going to need to get through that no matter what. But I also thought to myself, well, but what if he draws another counterspell? Like you might want to wait till the last minute to use it so that you know. And my assumption was that Matt was trying to use his mana because he knew he would be crimped on the turn that it was going to happen and he wanted to set it up. I was actually wrong. He had just looked at the list enough to know that literally negate was the only counterspell left available. Yeah. Like that was the only possibility. Yep. So once he nailed it, it was good to go. Mark says, now that you've seen some of the new Planeswalkers with static abilities and one or two loyalty abilities, how important do you think being ready to attack Planeswalkers in War of the Spark Limited will be?
I actually think it's more important to know when not to attack them.
Yeah.
Because the baseline is when your opponent plays a Planeswalker, you try to kill it. Because we're very trained to do this. Planeswalkers have been around for 12 years now, or 11 years. And most, like 90% of Planeswalkers, if they stay on the board for more than a couple turns, you're losing, right? If your opponent has one.
They generate value.
They just generate about a card's worth of value every turn. Almost all of them are like -3 kill a creature, +1 draw a card. Mm-hmm. So our Magic player brains, through repetition, have learned Planeswalker, have to kill it.
Yep.
I actually don't think that that's true. Looking at some of these Planeswalkers that are like somewhat low impact compared to what we're used to, because you have to. They're uncommon Planeswalkers. I think the real test is going to be when you know not to kill the Planeswalker. When your opponent's at 11, like, look, it's easy. If your opponent's at 4 and their Planeswalker's at 5 loyalty, it's like, well, you should probably attack your opponent. But what will really test you as a Magic player is your opponent's at 11 and they have a 4 loyalty or 3 loyalty Planeswalker, and you're just like, I got to attack my opponent. I shouldn't attack the Planeswalker. Mm-hmm. Like, that's going to be hard. So I would look to like kind of untrain yourself from just wanting to kill Planeswalkers and look to kind of thinking like, what happens if I don't kill this? Because I think that's the best way to look at it.
That's a really cool wrinkle for Limited too, because we just don't get permanent types like that very often, right? And Planeswalkers are generally mythic rare, so we just never see them. Ian says, what are both your opinions, or honest opinions, on the less Magic-orientated coverage team? And no LSV, I don't mean Paul and Marshall. I guess they mean Alias V and Dave, and then also like Day 9, who is a Magic player, by the way. Like, maybe he hasn't done like all the Pro Tours.
I think Kibler has played Magic.
Yeah, Kibler definitely has. Becco, she was doing the interviews and stuff. I mean, I thought they did a good job. Like, these are professional casters, whatever, like professional interviewer, professional
I have a very
host.
high opinion of well, I knew Day 9 and Kibler before this. I just know them both, and I think they're both excellent. I didn't get a chance to watch a ton of the round coverage, so I have less of an opinion on Alias V because I just didn't get a chance to catch the rounds. The interviews were a little easier to see because I was actually there on the floor. I thought Becca did a very good job.
Yeah, she brought a lot of enthusiasm and stuff.
Overall, I think it's awesome to bring in a good mix of it's kind of rough to say this because Marshall's right here. Good, experienced Magic commentators like Marshall and Paul. Yes, even Paul. Yeah. And people who are going to bring a new perspective and new levels of energy to it.
Yeah. Dave Williams, by the way, has been playing Magic for as long as I have. Yeah.
I kind of even didn't lump him in that because
he's just a Magic player.
I've just done commentary with him on like VSLs and stuff like that.
And I have done a Mox coverage with him as well.
If Dave hears that we're talking about him, he'll listen to this. But I do think, regardless, Dave is very, very good.
Yeah, I was actually really impressed by Alias V as well. Something that maybe people didn't know is that this is her first event doing coverage of any sort. And man, she got thrown into the deep end. And look, she can work on some stuff. Of course, we all can, right? But I have to say the potential is there. She was professional. She was nice. She was funny. And she really held her own in an extraordinarily hectic environment. I was very, very impressed. Oh, you got your phone again. Good. Checking the show notes? Do you want to ask the next question?
There's nothing on my phone.
Oh, my God. He's just trolling me. The screen was not even on. Jamie says, I thought coverage took a huge leap forward this weekend. Well done. I've also enjoyed the evolution of draft coverage at Pro Tours and Mythic Championships in recent years. I'm curious, after this weekend, how do you see draft coverage changing for arena tournaments? This kind of goes to what we were talking about before.
Yeah, I don't know
where does draft fit into a world where we're trying to shrink things down into best of one,
I don't think the arena championships are going to have draft.
I don't either. I actually talked to a listener of the show at PAX, and the answer is I don't think so either. Are you trying to plug in your phone?
It'll solve two problems in one.
All right.
So this way you don't have to worry about me messing with my phone.
And you feel like
my phone gets charged, so later later in the show I can just zone out.
All right, you did it. Now, when it comes to Pro Tours and Mythic Championships, though, I can't say anything definitive. But I've been talking to the people in charge, and they had brought this to me, some ideas, and they also asked me for what I wanted to do about ways that we could improve the draft coverage on the Mythic Championship streams. So there goes Luis's phone. So I think that we have a legit chance here to actually make some improvements at it as well, just from the Mythic Championship coverage perspective. So I'm really hoping that we get some cool steps forward with that. Some basic ideas that we came up with too, just stuff that it seems like we should just have this, like show the cards on the screen and that kind of stuff. So Carrie says, with the previews of War of the Spark, Planeswalkers and all of them having a static ability, do you see the set being extremely complicated? That's a good question. We talked about that. How do I decide whether to attack a Planeswalker or not? That does add a level of complexity.
This is going to be a hard set for Limited. I believe it's going to be quite challenging to play the games. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to that. I tend to like that, but I also know that, we're going to have to see where it lands, but my guess is it's going to be hard. Yeah,
it's really interesting to me about the Planeswalkers that have the static ability. Just as an example, we previewed Tibalt on the stream. It's like 2 in a red, 5 loyalty, -2, make a 1/1 devil that when it dies, it pings something.
And your opponents can't gain life.
And they can't gain life. But the interesting part about that is that it's -2, and then it just sits there at 1 loyalty.
Yeah, and I think those are generally mostly designed, it looks like, so they're supposed to just sit there at 1 loyalty and provide their static.
Right, and that's really interesting because there's a timing thing there, right, where if you can kill Tibalt before he gets to make the second devil, you might want to do that. But then after that, you really have to make a decision, am I actually going to be getting
there's
line?
Also proliferate. Yeah, we do know that's in the set. That adds counters. So if you let your opponent sit there with a Planeswalker on 1, and they proliferate up to 2, make another devil, you might end up losing out a little bit.
That's right. All right. Thank you for that question. Let's see. Where were we here? Whoop. There we go. Jonathan says, how do you feel the duo standard format played out at the Mythic Championship? Well, I guess we asked for this because I did ask for PAX questions. It seemed to push more towards extreme aggression and extreme control without any space for mid-range decks to shine. Jonathan, you nailed it.
Yeah.
That is exactly what it did.
In my mind, the biggest qualm I have with Best of One is the deck diversity issue. of how few decks there are. And this is both as a player who's looking at that I'm going to select to play in the tournament or play with or against, and as someone with an eye to coverage where it's just better for coverage. You don't want 100 decks, but you also don't want 4.
Yeah.
I think the sweet spot's like 8 to 10, something like that. So you can give people a repeated narrative. They understand what they're watching, but it's also just not the same decks every round.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is an interesting cross-section with that is that when you think about the new generation of players that are going to be watching this, a lot of them identify with a color pair, certain style of play. And if that's just not there, they're just like, well, I really like Sultai, or I'm a black-green,
right.
I'm a Golgari mage.
There wasn't a green deck,
right?
Yeah, they're just,
and most players love green at the beginning. I mean, Kibler still does. Shannon says most of us listeners probably draft at their favorite local game stores, and we normally crack a booster box for a draft pod. The chance of having duplicate rares in these pods are extremely low. Are there any difference in preparation or other competitors' decks' expectation when drafting in big events like GPs and Pro Tours where the card pools are a lot more randomized? I'll be attending GP Bangkok this October, and it may be my first ever large event drafting if it's a limited format. Good luck with that, Shannon. That is awesome. Is that even true? You can get 2 rares in the same box.
Yeah,
right?
I don't even know how much that actually is a thing.
Yeah, I don't know either. You certainly don't prepare differently.
Yeah, all I know is that you still hope to open Ethereal Absolution and hope your opponent doesn't.
Yeah.
But, it doesn't really change a whole lot outside of that.
Yeah, no, so not something to focus on for preparation for the GP in Bangkok, Shannon, if it does end up being limited. Harry says, you have talked about the effect of War of the Sparks Planeswalker pack on a draft. What about Sealed? Do you think that 6 Planeswalkers plus rares could make a format in which there's a much greater speed gap between Sealed and Draft and fairly different card evaluations? Great point there from Harry. 6 Planeswalkers. What in the world?
Yeah, and even if we see a lot of the Planeswalkers at lower rarities, which you'll see more often in the seeded, not seeded slot, I guess, not packs. Mm-hmm. I think that we're still going to see, fairly slower Sealed formats and more Planeswalker control type decks.
I think so too, especially for any planeswalkers that affect the board directly. That those are going to be the ones I think that we want the most. Mark says, with the huge viewing numbers for the Mythic Invitational, do you think this means a slow death for tabletop coverage and tabletop Mythic championships? Great question.
I don't think so. I think that that Wizards has a very big incentive to continue to support Paper Magic, and I believe wholeheartedly they will do so. I think we might see bigger prize pools at the arena tournaments, whether they're invitationals or championships, just because those are a little bit easier to translate into viewing numbers, which generates more money directly. So it's always easier to fund something when it creates more right away. That said, Paper Magic is still just so important to Wizards and to Magic that I don't think that we're going to see. Despite this success here, I don't think that we're going to see time to pull the plug on the tabletop stuff. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, they've said that they don't want that to happen, and just monetarily, that seems like a really big step that they're just not even close to.
There's just look at Magic Fest attendance. It's just selling out over and over again.
Yeah,
and that's a sign that Arena feeds Magic. I think a lot of people have it in their head that these both take from each other. That if Arena's successful, tabletop has to die or whatever. Or if we're supporting tabletop, it means Arena doesn't matter. It is a symbiotic relationship. And yes, there's some give and take where, if you have a marketing budget of X dollars and you decide to spend a lot of it on Arena, you have less for tabletop. But I think what's going to happen is that pie is just going to get bigger.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
And Arena being successful means more people want to play at their next Magic Fest. Yeah. And that being successful means that we have more money to spend on this. And, as someone who I'm pretty highly leveraged on Magic, I'm pretty happy with how all of that is going. Yeah. Both from the Channel Fireball side of we care about paper cards and paper tournaments. We run Magic Fests and we're very happy with how this is all going. I think Arena is quite a boon to use those of you who love tabletop.
Yeah, and I've also noticed that after having played Arena quite a bit now, if you listen to shows like this and you put in work, you can actually play for fairly cheaply. Ryan's got his per draft cost down quite low on his Going Optimal stream, and it's one of those things where I think you can do both. I understood before when people were like, I don't want to do Magic Online and paper because that did end up being really expensive.
$400 on a modern deck on Magic Online feels ridiculous when you've already done that in paper.
Yes.
But Arena is legitimately cheap to play.
It's free if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want,
can't play full Magic.
I think I did immediately put money in and have at regular times spent more money just to keep up. Mm-hmm. But I do think that it's a lot cheaper than paper Magic.
Yeah,
and it can feed into it nicely.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, look, if you are on a budget, Arena is actually great for this stuff. Ryan has a free-to-play account that he started when the beta came out, and he started doing his stream. He paid the $5 for like the super value pack. He has not added money to that. And look, you don't get to draft every day on it, but I think he's drafting something like 3 times a week, maybe 4 times a week. And that's just hitting the, refreshing the little, the daily quests and just hitting those, just using, free entry tournaments and that kind of stuff. So you can do it for sure. Ooh, great question here. And I meant to ask you this before as well, Luis. Anthony wants to know what the best food we had here was. Have you had anything good? What did I miss? I've been working the whole time, so I haven't got to hang out with Luis much.
What was the best thing I had?
You want me to tell mine while you think?
Yeah,
because I got a no-brainer. Oh. So we went over to a place in Chinatown last night, and it was basically all of us doing coverage, like me, Caleb, Rebecca, Chion, and Alias. And we went, and it was packed, right? Yeah. And we had just taken like a 12-minute Uber over there, and we're just like, we're all hungry. We're like, crap. How long is it going to be? Hour 15, hour and a half. And we're like, man. So Dave's like, well, let's just put our name down because you got to free roll it, right? We don't know where we're going. So we put our name down and we start looking around. We go walking around for about 10 minutes. We haven't found anything. We're starting to look at another restaurant further away, getting another Uber to go over there. I mean, it's starting to get to be one of those nights. Paul's phone rings. He answers it. Table of 6 just canceled. You guys can come over right now. We're like, we'll be right there. We went over. We got seated right away. This place was recommended by some of the Wizards employees who go to all the nice restaurants. And this place wasn't super fancy or anything, but it was awesome. Super good beef ribs. And they had this weird dish. It was like a, you know what carbonara is?
Yeah.
It was kind of like carbonara. This is a Japanese fusion place, but with ramen noodles instead, and like some kind of like Japanese seasoning type stuff. It was, you would have just amped it. It was so good. And then we also had like some baos and some chicken wings and stuff like that. But highly recommended. It's called Sojo.
Yeah, we went to Barcelona Wine Bar in Tapas and had a tapas brunch, and that was pretty good.
And what was the highlight?
Highlight was probably this like Spanish French toast thing. Ooh, that was really good.
Dang,
yeah,
dude,
and
that sounds
like patatas
good.
bravas and bacon wrapped dates and stuff. So.
By the way, I meant to tell you this. I haven't told you this yet, but I saw the interview you did in Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
That was cool, man.
Yeah.
You were just banging it right out with that guy.
Yeah, I was at GPLA. This guy asks, like,
like on air, you're like, we can do it in Spanish. He's like, really? You're like, yeah.
He asked if he could interview me, and I'm like, sure. And then he's talking to his cameraman in Spanish, and then the guy starts reading him questions that he's about to start translating, and I just tell him in Spanish. I'm like, hey, I speak Spanish. We could just do this interview in Spanish.
Yeah.
And so he did the interview. It was like about Modern or whatever in Spanish. It was really cool.
It was sweet, man. I was really impressed because I've known for a long time that you can understand and speak Spanish. And I've seen you order when we've been in Spanish speaking countries and stuff. But I mean, you were just banging right along with him. I was like, look at Luis go. Nice work. Alexander says, with the cards revealed today, from War of the Spark, it's clear that the whole set is heavily impacted by the prevalence of planeswalkers. I think that this will work in limited, seen as it is an isolated system there, but I'm concerned about the impact on standard. And I think what Alexander's referring to is there was multiple cards, not just that were planeswalkers, but that cared about them. Tap to add mana for planeswalkers, proliferate, like you said, that kind of stuff.
I mean, we'll have to just see what the cards look like because the power level really is going to determine.
I mean, that's it, right?
Happens.
This like the individual spikes in power.
There have been some standard formats where there's been like 6 or 7 playable planeswalkers, and that can be a lot. There's like Super Friends, like, back when like Ajani and Elspeth and Jace were all legal in Jeskai colors, for example. It's even before I think Jeskai was even a thing, yeah. But, if the War of the Spark planeswalkers are low power level, then we won't see this. If they're high power level, we might see that. Yeah, that's really how standard gets affected. It's not the broad picture, it's the individual cards. It's funny because people have this idea of what planeswalkers are, bolstered by the fact that they're at Mythic, they show up like 1 to 3 per set. They tend to fall in this power level and play pattern range. None of those things have to be true. Those just happen to be how the planeswalkers have been designed up to this point. When you make a set with 28 planeswalkers or whatever the number is, I expect those rules to somewhat go out the window, and that means these planeswalkers could be great and there could be a bunch of busted ones, or they could all not be that good. And it's just how you want to design them. So I don't think that there's a lot of givens that we have to assume as truths 4 planeswalkers, even though we've seen a lot of patterns and card types before.
Jonathan says, this one's for LSV because Marshall already answered it. Magic has experienced a lot of positives with Arena, PAX, and the great run of sets since Dominaria. If you had one fear about Magic, either as a whole or for you personally, what is it?
I think that if competitive tournaments become just best of one, I would have a harder time finding my place there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is... I mean, I wouldn't worry about you know, in Magic in general, but I mean, you have to enjoy what you're doing. You have to be compelled by it.
Yeah, I have other options except for just like, you know, look, trust me, I'm overjoyed that I still have what it takes to hang competitively. I think that that's awesome. Like, I feel really lucky.
Mm-hmm. Given your advanced age.
Yeah, my you know, the fact that I'm decrepit and senile now. No, but I do have a lot of other things I can do within Magic that aren't just that. Like, I mean, I think as you can see, I'm on this podcast.
You can
I like
sell
to
out
stream.
and join the coverage team.
Yeah, I'm good at being a buffoon, and I enjoy those things too. I'm not just like there was a time where I was just a very serious competitive player. That's all I did. That's very far from what I do now.
Yeah.
That all being said, I still love the fact that Magic is something I can really drill in on and be competitive in, and I don't know that best of one's good exactly that. Like, I'm not saying I hate best of one and never want to play it. I'm saying if it was just best of one, because that's what got the most eyeballs, I would have to reevaluate my approach to Magic. And maybe I would be able to find a different attack, and that's completely fine. But if you look at your win rates, right, like, I'm winning half my matches when I play best of one. You know, when I look at like my arena win rates. Like, it's going to be pretty hard to build a tournament resume if you're winning half your matches.
Yeah. Jaeger has a question actually referencing a play that was made today in the Mythic Invitational, and maybe we could just use it as a little mini learning moment or whatever if you were watching. Should Savitz have taken Absorb instead of Kaya in his final search for his Kanta activation last game at semifinal match against Bogowski? Did you see this?
Yeah, so the board position is Savitz is using Azcanta on his main phase with 3 mana up.
Yeah.
And he's at 3 life. Canister has 1 card in hand, which at this point I think Savitz can assume is not a 3 damage spell. Based on what's happened earlier, he would have just been dead. Mm-hmm. Savitz's other cards in hand are like a Kaya's Wrath and a Moment of Craving. Mm-hmm. And in that Azcanta activation, he gets to choose between Kaya, the Planeswalker, and Absorb. And he chose Kaya, played Kaya, went up to 5, and then died to Lightning Strike plus the card in Canister's hand, which was a Gitu Lava Runner. Yeah. My inclination, if I was Savitz, was to just take Absorb and pass. And so here's the reason. Assuming that the card in hand wasn't a 3 damage spell, you know, but easily could be Shock or Lava Runner. Those are both cards that Pyotr, you know, would have held in his hand. If Pyotr draws a 3 damage spell or anything, a Firebrand, any card, and you absorb it, you go up to 6. At most, you take 2 damage, go down to 4, and still have Moment of Craving plus Kaya's Wrath in your hand. The biggest reason to not take Kaya is that with an Azcanta already out, you're already winning if the game goes long. Every turn you're getting to Azcanta, you're going to find another negate. You're going to find an Absorb. You're going to find, you know, maybe Kaya if you go through your deck long enough. Mm-hmm. You're going to win the game given that. So you don't need to play Kaya to try to run away with the game. Because the advantage of Kaya is if you don't die, then you're just... Then the game's completely out of reach. Yeah. You need to untap, though.
Yes.
So let's say the situation was like slightly different. Let's say Savitz was casting... not using Azcanta, but like, let's say casting a spell like Impulse, which lets you look at the top 4, grab a card, and put the rest on the bottom, but he no longer had any other access to card draw. Then yeah, taking Kaya makes perfect sense because you don't have an ability.
It would be only a 1-shot, but
the fact that you can search every turn. So every turn. The bigger takeaway there is once you're winning, you don't need to take like high payoff, high risk plays, which the Kaya was. It was high payoff. If Savitz untaps, he just wins. It was high risk. If you know, Canister has a 2 damage spell, which he did, and draws a 3 damage spell, which he also did, you die, which isn't like super high probability, but it's the door's open. If you just pass with Absorb up, I think Savitz can't lose. Okay. Like I think that for him to lose there, Canister would have to draw like action, and start missing on us, and you miss on Azcanta a bunch of times.
Yeah, that's
very unlikely.
Almost impossible. Yeah, I had a quick chat with Woody after that, and we came to a similar conclusion. So we're obviously Hall of Fame level Magic players. Max Brett says, how do you use the interface in Arena to influence your opponent, and how does the interface influence your decisions? For example, auto-passing to represent having nothing, or using full control mode to bluff. Thanks for all the great content. Do you do that?
So I don't do that when I play Arena because I can't be bothered, basically.
It's just you're just too lazy.
I just want to play.
Yeah.
That was something like, one of the things like Hayne did in this tournament, which got him an advantage. And as I was actually used this for Genius or Grift. I'll just talk about this now. So we weren't allowed to play on full control mode. That was part of the tournament rules because, for a good reason. It would just not be fun to watch if everyone's on full control. But you were allowed to set stops. So Hayne set a stop during Andre's main phase, which meant that when Andre played a spell, Hayne got a response window. Well, you couldn't use full control, so what Andre thought was that Hayne had a counterspell. So Andre cast Mastermind's Acquisition. Hayne got a response window. The only card that would give him a response window, if it was a card, was Absorber Negate. So Andre used Mastermind's Acquisition, got duressed Hayne. Hayne had nothing.
Oh, wow.
And Hayne almost won the game based on that. He ended up losing still, but that was a key play, and he did that by putting a stop on the opponent's turn. That being said, I don't think it's grifter, but I don't think it's genius. I think on Arena you should just kind of play your games. Yeah. And I wouldn't worry about stops and playing. I mean, I know playing against full control is obnoxious, so I would highly recommend against that.
Yeah, I just, again, my litmus test for these type of things is what if everybody did it? And it's just worse for everybody, right? It's just a bad thing. So hopefully that's something that gets sorted out. Jonathan, again, says, I just moved to a new city with few accessible game stores. I have a few friends here, but I cannot consistently get 6 people together at once. Can you recommend a good in-person limited format you can play with only a few people? I do sealeds with my friends, but I wonder if you have a better idea. Whenever I do sealeds as well, because that's real practice. That's a real thing. And I really enjoy it.
If you don't want, if you're not hung up on actually getting real practice, like sealed is, you can do Winston or Winchester draft. Those are both pretty fun. I would Google Winston draft or Winchester draft Magic, and you can find examples of the rules for that. I played a lot of the one-on-one drafts like that.
Andy, I love that we got the question from Huey from this person. Andy, what's your life total Bentley? We're assuming that this is a mono red player or whatever. How many cards do you have? Oh, you're playing black. Okay. For LSV, do you think the field of decks would have been more diverse if it was a best of 3 format?
Yeah. It would have been. I mean, lack of sideboards meant that Golgari and Sultai strategies aren't very playable. It meant that, which then also meant that mono blue, despite it making the finals, I still don't think mono blue was that great of a choice. Aberration,
yeah. For Marshall, that's me. The event seemed like a resounding success. So, do you think this will lead to continued regular coverage down the road? And if not, what do you think it will take? Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that's a huge...
arena coverage is very clearly going to happen.
That was kind of the idea, right, is Magic wants to take a step into esports, and they did. And that's exactly what happened today. And if they didn't follow up on that, then they would have spent a lot of money to take a very large step forward and then just stop, and that's probably not going to happen. A couple more questions here. Starbright says, if you were a Planeswalker card, what would your ultimate be? You don't have to design the whole card unless you'd like to. I'm just curious for Marshall LSV ultimate emblem would look like.
If I was a Planeswalker,
mine would be return all opponents' creatures to their owner's hands.
I think mine would probably be. Well, see, this doesn't work. This is more of a digital design.
Okay, do that. Give it to us. Give us the digital design.
At the start of your turn, you draw an additional card during a draw step. The rope begins at the start of each of your turns.
That is absolutely brutal. So you have more to do and less time to do it with? Okay, that is great. It would benefit you greatly.
Yeah. That'd be a great ultimate.
I like that. Would the rope happen to both players? Or
No, just you.
Okay, just you. All right. Last question comes from Daniel, who says, would love to hear a postmortem on Duo Standard, both from LSV and competitor as a competitor and Marshall as a commentator. Was it too matchup dependent? Was it fun to play? Does there seem like it has a future competitive Magic? Well, I think we've covered that pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the biggest takeaway for me on Duo Standard is if you want a best 2 out of 3 tournament format, I would prefer to play best 2 out of 3. I think best of 1 is a good and fun way to play ladder. I still play, I play ladder best of 1. But when it comes to a tournament, especially one that you spend a lot of time preparing for, I would prefer to get a couple more shots in. I would prefer to have a few more decisions inserted into the gameplay process.
Okay. There's actually a follow-up question here from Paul who said, agreed. Just to add to that, from a viewer's perspective, seeing MTG on Arena is much more fun, but the format seemed to have too much variance and involved less the player with the audience? Do you feel the same way? Kind
Yeah,
of.
I mean, basically, this event makes me really optimistic. Because imagine this production value, these stakes, these casters, it's all the same things, maybe even the same, like a lot of the same competitors, especially me, hopefully. No. But imagine all of this, but a format that was even better.
Yeah.
Which I think there's room to grow there.
Totally.
And
absolutely.
that would be awesome. It's kind of like the thing where, you're doing a postmortem and it's like, well, all these things went well, but this could have been better. It's great. We can fix that thing. Then we're even better, because the worst possible is like, well, you did everything the best you could and only 2,000 people showed up to watch.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, where do we go from there?
Right.
Here it's like 100,000 people showed up to watch. How many more will show up if the format's even more engaging? Which I think there is room to grow there.
And speaking of, Sam Jones with the actual last question says, what were the biggest pros and cons to the tournament being on Magic Arena instead of paper Magic from both a player and coverage perspective? Why don't you give the player perspective and I'll give the coverage.
For pros, for me, it's there's no ambiguity. There's no like, oh, I thought you said you go, or oh, did you pass before damage? Oh, I meant to do this. There's no,
no awkward judge calls there.
Right. It was very easy. There's no bringing cards to the event. Like, look, we played a wish board, right? Mastermind's activation for our sideboard. And normally, if we decided to put a Sanguine Sacrament, it'd be like, where are we going to get 7 Sanguine Sacraments the night before the tournament? For here, it didn't matter. It was fast. It looked good.
Your matches were a little quicker than you had hoped for, but at least the gameplay was quick, right?
The gameplay's snappy. There's also like, you don't have to worry about like stacking your triggers, putting dice on your history of Benalia, that sort of thing. And that's not like, you've heard me talk about like, well, I would like more skill here or there. I don't think that like that's not the part of the skill of Magic I enjoy. Like, remembering your triggers is not something I think is particularly interesting to test. I would rather test people's tactical decisions.
Right.
Their strategic decisions.
Right.
So those are all pros. I think for cons, like misclicks are a little pretty brutal. Like, at one point in the tournament, like, Matt Nass went to go play a land, but accidentally played a Kaya's Wrath on an empty board. Like, lucky it was that's Premier, so it just didn't matter. But like, he drugged the wrong card out of his hand. And that can't really happen in paper Magic. Like, in paper Magic, you might play the wrong land by accident. But first of all, the way the rules work right now, you can take it back if nothing has happened. Like, if you do it quickly, you're like, oh, I didn't mean to play a mountain, I meant to play an island.
Yeah.
Second, like, you're just not going to Wrath on an empty board. It requires you to tap your lands and stuff like that. Arena just like, there it goes. It's happening.
It goes. Yeah.
So I think that like that was probably something that like scared me. It didn't happen to me. I didn't play enough games to misclick, but misclicking is going to be part of. It's not unreasonable to assume that someone's going to accidentally fanatical Firebrand targeting themselves or itself. I guess that's a little harder to do because they put up a response window, but someone's going to drag out the wrong card they didn't mean to play.
Yeah.
And that could decide a match, and that would be unfortunate. But
did you miss holding the cards? Like, I mean, you're a fan of like the artwork.
I miss the tactile, like the artwork, the getting to choose which lands I play of all these old cards. But honestly, those are small. Yeah. I overall think this was a very good experience, and I would like to play more arena competitive tournaments.
For me, to answer the question on what are the biggest pros and cons from the coverage perspective, as far as cons, I just can't think of one. Like, it was awesome. What's that?
Gion?
No, I'm talking about MTG Arena. It was awesome. Yeah. It is so great to do it from the coverage booth. I can't even begin to say how sweet it is. A lot of your coverage style when you're coming up with kind of how to approach it when you're doing paper Magic is deciding how to fill in time, like when people are shuffling, sideboarding,
or even
thinking.
Just making decisions.
Yeah, there's a cadence to it where you don't want to go all in and get super excited about a moment until you know for sure it's coming, because it could be 30 seconds or a minute until it appears. On Arena, it's fast. It goes back and forth. I can set up my co-commentator. They get it back to me. I get it back to them. You and I, dude, when we get it, it's just bang, 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 bang. It's going to be awesome. And you get the fun stuff too, kind of the animations and stuff just add a neat dynamic. The attacks where it's like bang, 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 and the creatures are slamming into the other opponent. That stuff's great. And the fact that you can just see everything. I know every card. I know every card in their hand. I know every card in your hand. It gives me an indicator for what the player has seen before, so I don't have to remember, what did they see as Thoughtseize?
Count libraries.
I didn't even know what they had in their hand.
All that stuff.
Yeah, all of that stuff is just available to you. So for me, I would I would love to commentate any and all arena tournaments I could get my hands on, just from a personal perspective, because it was so much more fun. It was so much easier to do just from getting a good picture on the thing. And I'll tell you what, I mentioned it, but I went out and I sat in the audience while Paul and Alias V were doing their rounds here on the last day. And this is where we're in the PAX Arena, I think it's called. We were playing arena in the arena. And they have a huge screen up there, and it looked gorgeous. Like, arena looked so good on the screen. Like, you could just read and see everything. It was beautiful, and it just wouldn't have looked as cool if it was an overhead cam of two people playing Paper Magic. It's just that simple. So, yeah, for me, high marks across the board for it, and I want to do as many of these as I can. Like, it's just so much better to commentate. All right, let's wrap it up here. Luis and I, we better get some dinner or something, man. I'm starving. I'm sure you are too. Long day, time to relax finally after being done with work here. But thanks for everybody for the questions and for hanging out with us. First, I want to say thanks to our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all your Magic needs, including selling cards. This is a big thing that you need to do to keep that kind of Magic circle of life going. Is sometimes you got to sell some cards back. Maybe it's a rare that you actually like, but a lot of times it's just the cards that you have sitting on your desk that you're not going to use anyway. You can package them up, send them into Channel Fireball, and if you do, they will give you a 30% trade-in bonus on store credit, which is fantastic. So that's a great way to pick up a new box of, get pre-ordered up on War of the Spark or whatever, and get the new cards in your hands for those cards that you're not going to use anyway. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. And you can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. Thank you so much. See you next week.
So one of the funniest things about best of one deck construction was actually the sideboard, as it turned out. So
yeah,
it's all because of the card Mastermind's Acquisition, which is not a card you see really get played in like best of three standard. And what the card does, it's 2 black. You can either search your library for a card, put it in your hand, or search for a card you know outside the game and put it in your hand, which in this context means your sideboard. And even though it's best of one, you're allowed to submit a sideboard. And so what that means is the opportunity cost of putting a Mastermind's Acquisition in your deck is lower. Because let's say you're playing best of three standard and you're like, well, I want to make a wish board for my Mastermind's Acquisitions. That's conflicting with your actual sideboard space. So now you have a smaller sideboard or a worse sideboard. In best of one, well, you're not using your sideboard at all. So how it began was like, well, let's try out a Mastermind's Acquisition or two in our Esper deck. And then some people play it in these Dovin's Acuity Esper decks as well. And you put stuff like Mirari Conjecture, Clear the Mind, Sanguine Sacrament, Healing Grace, Ixalan's Binding, all this kind of stuff, a Nezahal and Ethereal Absolution. And that was pretty cool, right? Like trying to discuss okay, what do we need in our sideboard? Like Lyra Dawnbringer was a card we played, a Devious Cover-Up, just a lot of really cool things like ways to kill an enchantment, ways to kill an artifact, ways to have a sweeper, a big threat, a big like Mirari Conjecture to go off where you get back your acquisition and play a double copied acquisition, Unmoored Egos.
Which we saw a few times. Oh, Unmoored Ego is nasty.
Unmoored Egos are really important to go get your opponent's Teferis or Mastermind's Acquisitions. But it actually got really deep. So here's where it gets really deep. Is if you have Direfleet Daredevil in your deck, you also need a sideboard because let's say you're playing Gruul or Teamer and have Direfleet Daredevil. Well, some of the time what we noticed happened in testing was you'd play Direfleet Daredevil, they'd have a Mastermind's Acquisition, and if you had a sideboard, you could go get a perfect card.
That's insane.
And so making our Teamer deck sideboard, it actually came down and man, we almost played this Teamer deck. I don't know if you saw it. It was like the mono red deck that was splashing Hydroid Crisis. So it was like...
What?
Oh, and it's not even joking. This is Goblin Chain Whirl, Lightning Strike, Shock, Rekindling Phoenix, Siege Gang Commander, but then it just plays all these blue-red and red-green lands to play 4 copies of Hydroid Crisis as the only...
Just to reload?
As the only blue or green card in the deck, basically.
That's insane.
That deck was sweet, and it actually had both Treasure Map and Direfleet Daredevil in it, so our wish board had cards of all 5 colors.
Is expansion... a thing here, or am I misremembering
No, that was
something?
the Teamer Reclamation deck that had
expansion. But that can copy...
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So you would want to put a sideboard in that deck, too.
So we found that basically this Teamer deck, one of its main win conditions against Esper Acuity or Esper... At this point, I think about half the Esper decks in the tournament had Mastermind, maybe more than half.
One was a common number, sometimes up to more.
We had 2 in our deck. A lot of people played 1, where you'd get Sylvan Awakening, the 2 and a green card that turns all your lands into 2/2s, because the games go so long. So then it also meant that when you're playing Teamer Reclamation with Expansion Explosion in your deck, you need a sideboard because expansion copying Masterminds Acquisition was like an actual thing.
It's funny to see all these sideboards and you can't even sideboard legally.
Right. And you just like think of all these like weird convoluted situations. And at some points we got a little too deep where it's like, well, if you have Thief of Sanity in your deck, you can get Masterminds off their deck. Okay, I buy that. Well, if you have Entrancing Melody in your deck, you could steal their Thief of Sanity and then hit them and take their acquisition. It's like, well, we probably don't need a sideboard. You know, if we're going that deep.
I mean, it's a free roll anyway.
If you have an Eldest Reborn in your deck, then you can get back. And then it's like, well, what if they play Switcheroo and give you Thief of Sanity? And at that point, it's like, all right, slow down.
Come on.
We've reached the end of this. So I actually thought that was a really interesting part about Best of One deck building, and I enjoyed like the math. Like at one point, we had a team conference call, right? It was like 6 of us. And we talked for 45 minutes about Esper, about like the last couple slots, spent a solid 15 minutes on the wish board, all that. And then they were like, okay, our second deck's mono red. What do you want to talk about? It's like, well, do you want to play 3 Skewers or 3 Wizards Lightnings? And then everyone's like, yeah, probably 3 Wizards Lightnings. And then that was
Good meeting, guys.
So, Best of One deck building had some swings, but the addition of Masterminds Acquisition actually added a lot to the format.
That's great.